Good to have you tonight. Good to have Brother and Sister Leonard with us. We're excited to begin our summer series tonight. You'll be our first speaker in our series. Understanding the Times is our theme, and we're looking forward to hearing you tonight. I've known Brother Leonard has been in our area about 5 years, and I have yet to hear you speak. And that's unfortunate. It probably says more about me than it does about you, but we're looking forward to hearing from you. He preaches presently at the West Georgia congregation, been there about 5 years. You've also preached in Wyoming, I understand, Arkansas, and Alabama, Mississippi. We won't hold Mississippi against you. We're glad to have you and your wife, Nikki, with us here tonight. You have 2 children, Elijah and Gracie, graduate of Memphis School of Preaching and also Arkansas State University. That says a lot about you also. And so we very much are honored to have you and your wife with us. And I won't take any more of your time. And hopefully you'll hear the bell ring. And if not, you'll see everybody stampeding here. Thank you.
Well, we are honored to be with you tonight. We have known of this congregation since we moved into the area 5 years ago, and we've been here for a few of your meetings and singings and a few things like that through the times. And over the last year or so, I've been able to teach a class 1 quarter each year with the School of Preaching that's associated here. So more and more we're becoming familiar with this area and the people here, and it is certainly wonderful to be with you tonight. Understanding the times. Yeah, we talk about things from time to time in our studies, and we discuss relevancy, wanting things to be relevant, things to be about what we're dealing with today. It is a misnomer that people take the Bible sometimes and say that it's such an antiquated book that it doesn't have anything to say to us about our lives today, about our nation, about the things that we face. In reality, we can look back through all of time and we can see many of the same issues, same difficulties, same attitudes, same problems have plagued man ever since the first sin that we read about in Scripture. So it's not that the Bible is irrelevant, not at all. And there's no way that we can read God's Word with an open mind and think that these truths don't hold anything for us today. We have to see the Bible for what it is. It is the revelation of truth. Just because it was revealed a long time ago does not make it irrelevant or something that has no point for us today. Yeah. We do need to understand our times. We live in our times. We don't live in Jesus' time when he was here. That was 2,000 years ago. We don't live in Moses' time. That was much further back. We don't live in Adam's time, all the way back at the beginning. Certainly, the times that we live in now, these times are a little bit different. But how are they different? Are they different in real ways, or are they different in superficial ways? You know, the same sicknesses and problems, and not just speaking spiritually, but physically, the same things are here that have been. Are we finding new things today, or are we just maybe understanding more about the things that have always been here? Our scientists dig and discover and learn, and they say we have come up with such greater things. No, we haven't come up with anything greater. We understand more things than people used to. We can divide things down smaller and have means of looking at them and testing things at a much smaller level. But something that we keep finding over and over again is that the smaller it gets, the more intricate it gets, the more detailed it is. When we say, well, we can now divide this and we're going to see what's really at the heart of it. And then we only find out a few years later that we can divide it again and again and again. And it's just deeper and deeper as we go. God has always given his will to man. Even when man didn't understand all of the things that we do today about this world, about the things that surround us, but God has always spoken. He has always told man what is more important than the understanding of all of these things. We do need to understand our times, and we don't need to be blinded by all of the information that we live. If any time has been the information age, this is it. The next generation, it may be even more so for them, but I can't imagine how. We've got the information of the world at our fingertips. We've got it in our computers at home. We've got it in libraries. We've got it on our hips, most of us do, where you can pull your phone out and find just about anything you'd like to. Sometimes that is more dangerous than it is good. But when we start thinking about what all God has given, He's never changed it. He's never altered it. And tonight we're talking about understanding the times, and we're going to be looking specifically at family matters. We often read in the newspapers and see on television all of the different things that are coming out that are trying to change the family, change the home the way God gave it. We know what the home was from the very beginning. It began with a man and a woman coming together in marriage. And then the children that were born to that union. We read about the family unit. Some people call that the nuclear family. Now, the idea of a man, a woman, children, the household, the whole working together of the unit that God gave. All the way back in Genesis 2, we read a few of the particulars. And as we come through Scripture, we read several more particulars brought out about that family unit that God gave. But that's not what we're hearing about in the media today. That's not what we're hearing about when we hear people discussing this openly in public, when people are debating these things, when we have men running for office and using these things as ploys. That's all it is. You back up and look at it, and that's all it is a ploy. I want your vote, so I'm going to talk about this. Because this is a hot topic. This is something that brings a lot of attention. This is something that people care about right now, so I'm going to talk about it. The man who stands up and says, I'm all for these different things. Things that have not been accepted here in the past. Things that are changing the family unit. I'm all for these things. Look at his life. Most of those men have what we would call a nuclear family. A man and a woman and their children. Now, not all of them are doing things properly, but I'm saying that for the most part, they live in the family that has been in that form at least all along. But they'll talk about those things because it gets people's attention. The family in America, just like in other places, we're not the only place, the family is being redefined. Now we have people saying 2 women can join in marriage. 2 men can join in marriage. They can make a home together. They can have a union. They can be life partners. Years ago, it was called an alternate lifestyle. Now, if you said that publicly, that would be an offense. That would be a slap in the face. Because people now are standing up and saying, this is not alternate. This is who we are. This is the way we are. And we can't help this. This is just the way we were born. And this is the way we're going to live. No. You can claim anything you like. You can say it any way you like. In my childhood, the adulterous relationship was the big deal. Someone leaving their spouse to go to someone else. And when my parents were children and that kind of thing happened, everybody in the neighborhood shunned those people. When I was a child, it was becoming more prominent. And now the idea of adultery doesn't even turn people's heads. They don't think twice about it. Does that mean that in America we have redefined the relationship to be something that, no, we have not redefined it. We have not redefined it. What we have done is have made common something that is evil, something that is sinful, something that is completely and utterly perverse. Adultery. I'm not talking about homosexuality yet. Perverse. A perversion. To change something into something it's not supposed to be is to pervert it, to corrupt it. Adultery is a perversion. Homosexuality is a perversion. It's a perversion. It's not an alternate. It's not an acceptable second. It's a perversion. Not redefining the home, except on maybe in the minds of the culture, the minds of the world, but not from what God gave. You can't redefine, you can't change what comes from the authority over heaven and earth. You can't change it. You can try. You can do what you're going to do, but in reality, in the end, what you're saying is, you set this rule, I'm going to live this way. I can say whatever I want to about it. It doesn't change what the authority is. It does not change the truth. So understanding our times, we live in a time when our nation has decided to remove God instead of exalt God. Our forefathers in this country, the ones who wrote our founding documents, the ones who helped to build this nation into what it was going to become, most of them, I don't know of any of them that I've read about as an individual who were actually Christians. But I've read a lot about many of them who, even though they might not have been following the word precisely, they had a respect for God, they had a respect for His word, and they brought that into their building of this country. They brought it in. Our documents are filled with biblical allusions. You go through state constitutions and you'll read the name of God listed in many of them. This country was founded upon people, or ideas, principles that the people held with a belief in God. And now we live in a time when people want to remove that. So how do we see it? How do we see it coming across as attacks, as trying to redefine, as trying to change things about the family and make it altogether different than what God gave? Well, one of the first things that I remember hearing about when I was young were people attacking the wife, the mother, attacking the home itself by attacking her role. You go all the way back to Genesis 2 and you're going to read the fact that Adam, although he was made in the image of God after his likeness, Adam was perfect without any flaw or sin, but we read that he was alone and he needed something. He needed someone. And God did not make him a friend. He didn't make another kind of animal. He made a helpmeet. Brought her unto him. She became his wife. They became one flesh. God lays that out very carefully in Genesis 2 so we can see it and understand it. The husband and the wife came together in the marital union. They became one flesh, never to be severed until one of them or both of them were dead. We read further about this union, not just Adam and Eve, but about the union of marriage as we keep going through the scriptures. How long did it take before men started to pervert what God gave? It's not our times. It's been going on for all of time. By the next marriages and the next relationships that we're actually reading about, we're reading about perversions. We're reading about godly people and ungodly people and the problems that it was bringing to such an extent, Genesis 6, the first few verses, that God said, I'm going to kill everybody. Do you realize what you read in Genesis 6? Man had corrupted and perverted himself to such a degree that God says, I'm going to kill everybody. The statement of judgment that comes from God in Genesis 6 did not include Noah. The statement of judgment was, I'm going to kill everyone. It repents me. I've changed my mind. I wish I hadn't even made man. I'm going to kill every man. Not male. Every one of mankind. Then it says the exception that comes to mind. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. The statement of judgment was, I'm going to kill them all. But I'm going to spare Noah. So he makes a covenant. Read Genesis 6 again. He makes a covenant with Noah. For Noah, for his wife, for his 3 sons, and their wives. He makes a covenant with Noah at the same time that he commands him to build the ark. The covenant with Noah was, I'm going to save your family. Your family. And then he did exactly what he promised he would do. He killed everybody else. God does not take well to people corrupting and perverting, trying to change or alter his word. In practice or in principle. God doesn't deal with that in the way that we might think he would. He does not deal kindly or nicely. It is sharp. It is full of anger and wrath. It is judgment. We need to know the mercy and the love and the grace of God. But we need to know that that's not everything about God. He's also a God of justice, a God of wrath, a God of judgment. And when we decide in our times that the times matter more than the authority of God, then we're going to come face to face with God one day, and it's not going to be pleasant. Men have corrupted marriage since very early on. By Genesis 18 and 19, we read very openly about homosexuality. In Sodom and Gomorrah, you remember, Lot had pitched his tent towards Sodom and was there sitting in the gate, was one of them. His family had become integrated in the mix of Sodom, so much so that when the angels came and warned him to get out of there, his sons-in-law wouldn't come. His wife, against God's command, looked back and was turned to a pillar of salt. When Noah built the ark, there were 8 members of his family. They all got on the ark. When God sent fire and brimstone out of heaven upon Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot lost half of his family. His wife and his 2 sons-in-law. Because of perversions. In Leviticus chapter 18, verse 22, in a very plain statement of law, God says, you shall not, don't lie with man as you would with woman. Do not. It's a perversion. It's a corruption. The home has been under attack in the roles of the husband and wife. It's been under attack in the idea of heterosexuality, homosexuality. The home has been under attack when it comes to our children. Don't you lay a hand on your child. Don't you raise a hand to your child. Dr. Benjamin Spock tells us a better way to do things. In the book of Proverbs alone, how many times do we read God telling Solomon's son through him this great wisdom? You need to be beaten. I think that's a very popular message today. Children need to be beaten. Now, we have a very different connotation to that, don't we? When we say a child is being beaten, we mean abused. That's what we usually mean when we say that. A child is being abused. They're being beaten mercilessly. They're being beaten in an unreasonable manner. That's not what God said through Solomon. Not to beat them unmercifully, not to beat them within an inch of their lives. He gave him some specific instruction, and the beating was to bring about a change. The beating was to bring about a change. If you pop your child and they don't even cry, you didn't do it right. If you pick up a stick and pop your child and they look at you and say, no, you didn't do it right. If you have to do it twice, it better be because the first time was an honest mistake and you didn't know better, and the second time you're going to make it right. So that when you look at that child and say, no, they stop. So when you're in the store and they say, I want this, and you say, we're not getting that, they say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. And they stop. They don't fall down on the floor and kick their feet and scream and cry until they get literally sick and throw up in the floor. Our society tells us that there's a better way to do things. God's Word, and if we will look honestly at the experiences of our lives, our parents, our grandparents, the past generations, we'll see you can pervert it all you want to, you can't improve on it. Children need discipline. You know why children need discipline? Luke 2, verse 52 talks about Jesus. And it says that Jesus grew in 4 different ways. Have you ever stopped and read that? It says that he grew mentally in wisdom. He grew in stature. He grew physically. He grew in favor with God and man. He grew spiritually, and he grew socially. Our children are not born mature. They're born extremely immature in all of those areas. And they have to grow into maturity with good guidance and leadership and discipline and training from parents. From parents who have the experience of life to know what that child needs. And when one generation grows up and doesn't give that to their children, guess what the next generation doesn't give to their children? Or the next, unless somebody stops somewhere along the way and reads this and says, there's some wisdom here. Some wisdom that goes beyond Benjamin Spock. Some wisdom that goes through the generations. We see the attacks against the home, and they have come so regularly. They come every day. They are incessant. I wonder who's behind all of this. Who was behind the difficulty and the problems in the first family? Satan. The temptation that was brought to Eve. We read in 1 Timothy chapter 2, some very important things about that. You know, when Paul is writing about the difference of roles of the husband and the wife, and even in the church, the men and the women. You remember what he wrote there in 1 Timothy 2? After he told the men to lift up holy hands and told the ladies to dress modestly with shamefacedness and sobriety, he goes on to explain the difference of the roles as to what's behind it. What's the motivating factor? First of all, because men were created first and not the woman. The man was created first. And secondly, the man was not deceived. The woman was. He's not putting down women. He's giving reason for the difference of the roles. One of the attacks that has come against the home about the roles of women is saying, well, if women step into the biblical role of being in submission while the husband is the head, then she's in a lesser role. She's in a lower position. Ladies, have you heard this? Has it been pushed on you? Have you been slapped in the face with this enough over the years? That if you are a housewife and a homemaker, you are less of a person than that career woman who's out there living her life and doing her thing. You can say whatever you want to. One of the things that has made women over the years say that having the career is the best thing that ever happened to them is because they feel guilty about their home. It's been my experience. I'm not saying it's wrong for a woman to work. Proverbs 31 is all over that. That woman worked. She worked hard. She earned money for her family. She helped support her family. But you know what she never did in the middle of all that? Not one thing there ever insinuates that she let her family go. That she failed to keep her home. When Paul writes to Timothy and to Titus about the older women and the younger women, especially to Titus chapter 2, he tells the older women, teach the younger women. Teach them to love their husbands. Teach them to love their children. Teach them to keep their home. Because those aren't things that just naturally fall onto a lot of ladies. Some ladies it comes to more naturally than others. Just like for some men, it doesn't come naturally to lead their family the proper way. Others, it comes more naturally. Either way, we're commanded to do it. We have roles to fill. God gave a pattern to the home. A pattern that he gave in the beginning, that he has continued all along with, and a pattern that still remains today. He gave it back in Genesis 2. We see it reiterated in the giving of the old law, Moses, Deuteronomy chapter 24. We see it dealt with by Jesus in Matthew 19, Matthew 5, several passages. And then Paul deals with it again very openly and even in more detail in Ephesians 5, 22 through 33. He says the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. He tells the wives right before that, submit to your own husbands. 1 Peter chapter 3, wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, dwell with your wives according to knowledge. What's he saying in all of these statements? The woman is in a lesser role? That's not what I read. And that's not what you should read into that either. It's not a lesser role. It's a different role. If it's a lesser role, then you explain to me what 1 Corinthians 11 verse 3 means. Where it says, the head of every man is Christ. The head of the woman is the man. And the head of Christ is God. Lesser? Because God is the head of Christ, does that make Christ lesser? Or does it make him different? I don't think anybody in here would dare say it makes him less. And it doesn't make the woman less for the man to be the head either. She's not forced into that position. This is not the husband domineering over a wife, forcing her into a submissive role. That's not what we should read in this. If that's what's happening, then the husband is wrong. What should be happening is a wife chooses to submit herself. And it doesn't say to do that because the husband is bigger and stronger. It doesn't say to do that because the husband is smarter. It doesn't say do that because the husband is better. It says do that because this is your role that's assigned by God. So fill the role. And husbands, some husbands think that because the wife is supposed to be in submission, he's supposed to be the head, that makes them king of the home. That's not what it says. That is not at all what it says. In the same breath where he says, submit yourselves to your own husbands, he says, husbands, love your wives. He gives at least two qualifiers in Ephesians chapter 5. You love her as you love your own body. You're not going to go do something harmful and hurtful and crazy like that to your own body. Take care of your wife like that. And much, much more so, you love your wife as Christ loves the church and gave himself for it. Love your wife the way that Christ loves the church. Do you think the church could be in any better position in the world or beyond this world than to be in subjection to the headship of Christ? And a woman should find herself in a position where she could not be any better off anywhere in this world or beyond than to be in subjection to her husband, who loves her, who cares for her, who will protect her, who in attitude, if nothing else, will give himself for her. It shouldn't be a detrimental role. It shouldn't be a woman being put down. In fact, we read in 1 Peter chapter 3, when he says, dwell with your wives according to knowledge, he also, in this consideration, says, treat her well. She's the weaker vessel. Give honor to her. You know what it means to give honor to someone? If a dignitary comes in the room and people give honor to that person, they do it in different ways. But we see it. It's outward. They may bow before someone. They may, in some cultures, go over there and take the person's hand and kiss their hand. They may display this in different ways, but it's always the idea of showing how great I believe you are. So I honor you. I give glory to you. He says, you do this to your wife. She's the weaker vessel. Give honor to her. You know why men open doors for women? They did when I was growing up. I still do that. I hope you do too. Do you know why we do that? It's not because she's incapable of opening a door. That's not the issue at all. She can turn a doorknob and open a door just as well as I can. That's not the point. The point is chivalry. Somebody has said, and it's been repeated over the years, chivalry is dead. Well, it may be for you. Guess what else may be dead for you? Your marriage? Perhaps that died along with your chivalry. God gave us a brain so we could reason, and then he gave us instruction so we could have something good to work with. We need to dwell with our wives with consideration, dwell with them with chivalry. We need to show them the care and concern, the compassion, everything that comes from that marriage and from that relationship. We need to show that to her. And sometimes we need to do it in ways where everybody else around us sees it too. We look at this and see that the home has been under attack for a long time. The role of husbands and wives. Do you know one reason why it's so difficult for wives to be in submission to their husbands today? Because the husband has been attacked. We talked about the roles and the wife not wanting to be in submission today in our society. In the church, it's usually a very different matter. In our society, wives are put down if they submit. They're put down if they keep their home and if they have a focus on their children and their family. They should never be put down by the brethren. They should never be put down by their spouse. They should be held up and honored because of the position they're holding that's given by God. But husbands, sometimes we make it nearly impossible for a wife to submit to us and live that godly life. Because there are so many men who won't step up and be the head that God tells them to be. Our society has attacked that. If you step up as a head, you're domineering. If you step up to lead, then you're just in the wrong. You're an equal with your spouse. You shouldn't be out in front. You shouldn't. Listen, our society can say, again, whatever they like about the roles of husband and wife. God set them a long time ago. And what you see in this nation, as in any other nation, is that when a man and woman come together in marriage and practice the roles that God gave them in marriage, then you see not just long-term marriages, you see good marriages, successful marriages. Just because you reach 50 years does not make your marriage successful. Don't fall into that. Well, we didn't get divorced like so many other people, so we must be doing something right. Well, the only difference may be that you hadn't written down anything on a piece of paper. Just because you stay together doesn't make a marriage successful. You ever see people together 50 years who are miserable, who can't stand each other, but they're just so bent on not being divorced that they'll stay together no matter what happens? Would you call that a successful marriage? I wouldn't. Two people who have what chance? What chance of going to heaven? And if they go, I don't know how it's going to happen. In 1 Peter 3:7, Peter says something to the husband there about the way he treats his wife. He says, you'd better treat her this way, because if you don't, your prayers are hindered. You know what it means to have something hindered? Something's in the way. Something's not letting you do what you want to do. Something is keeping you from going in a direction or from accomplishing a goal. He says, if you treat your wife wrongly, your prayers are hindered. They don't reach God. You're not speaking to your Father when you're not even speaking to your wife. We need to understand what this relationship means and what our society is trying to do in the undermines and the attacks that are brought against the home all of the time. There's a pattern for the home. A pattern for husbands and wives, a pattern for parents and children. Children are taught through God's word to obey their parents in the Lord. To obey. Do you know what obey means? Obey means you say it, I do it. Do you know how many, probably of our marriages in this room alone, had those words in the wedding vows when the ladies were saying their side? I will obey you. When we do that today, people say those are traditional. We're going to use traditional vows. Don't use traditional vows unless you have traditional ideals. Don't say you will obey if you're not going to obey. Don't say love, honor, and obey if you're going to be selfish. You might as well stand up in front of all the witnesses and say, I'm going to be selfish. I want you to serve me. I want everything to be about me, the individual. One of the biggest attacks that marriage has today is something that usually doesn't get talked about in marriage. It just gets talked about with individuals, with people, but it affects marriage very strongly, and that's selfishness. You pick up any psychology book you want to that's been written in the last 100 years, and you tell me what it's about. It's all about me. Everything's about me. I need to be in therapy. I need to be thinking about me. I need to find myself. I've got a pretty good idea where I am. I know me pretty well. I know me better than any psychologist with any number of string of letters after his name you want to give him, and let him sit in a room and talk to me for an hour 3 times a week. Do you know what he's going to know about me? Only what I tell him. Only what I tell him. That's all he's going to know. So after he hears me for a few hours and starts diagnosing me and helping me, it's all about me. Our psychologists aren't the first ones to think this way. You go back to the Greeks, the great thinkers, and you hear statements like, know yourself. Control yourself. Do you remember what the great thinker Jesus said to do? Deny yourself. Stop putting all the focus on you. Yes, the individual is important, but if you get so wrapped up in the individual that you can't see anyone else the way you should, then guess what's going to happen when you get married? A relationship that is supposed to be completely built upon the idea of the other person. What's going to happen when you get married? When the honeymoon's over, so's the marriage. As soon as the excitement and the new wears off, the marriage is done because I am completely and utterly selfish. It's not just our times. It's been around for a long time. The home has been under attack. God gave us a pattern. Do you know what happens when you deviate from a pattern? Any of you ladies make clothes? What happens when you deviate from a pattern? You get 3 sleeves. There aren't many people who can use that. We know what it means to change from a pattern. It means to corrupt. It means to pervert. It means to destroy. Our homes have been facing these attacks for all of time. In our time, some of the greatest attacks have to do with the roles of men and women in marriage, have to do with the nature of marriage itself between 2 men or 2 women instead of a man and woman the way God gave it. Attacks against the way we raise our children. Attacks against the very fabric of the makeup of the home. And what is the old quote that's been around forever? As goes the home, so goes the nation. You tear our homes apart, and what's going to be left as a building block, as a foundational standpoint for a nation of people? What are you going to work for? What are you going to fight for? What are you going to support? What are you going to hold on to? Who are you going to have in your life? And what is that relationship really going to mean? The home is supposed to be at the center of everything in a society. When people go to work and come back home, what does that mean? There's nothing like walking back in the door after you've been gone all day and see your spouse coming to meet you at the door. See your children come running to you. There was a man in an airport some years ago, came off of a plane. There was a younger man had been sitting and talking with him on the plane. When they got off the plane where they were going, he walked out there, and the older man's wife came rushing to him and embraced him. And while he was hugging her, their children came up and gathered around, and they were just clamoring, "Oh, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." And the whole family bunched up all around him. And after a few minutes of watching this, the young single man walked over and told him, said, "I enjoyed visiting with you on the plane, and I have to tell you, you are so lucky to have what you have." And the man said, "Fella, luck didn't have anything to do with it." There's a pattern. God gave a pattern, he said, for that husband and that wife. There are some things that need to be known and followed and practiced very diligently and faithfully. You need to become one flesh. You need to take care of each other. You need to support each other. You need to fill your roles properly so that you have a working relationship, something that works well together inside the home and in the society. When you bring children into that relationship, then raise those children. Ephesians 6, 1 through 4. As he tells the children to obey their parents in the Lord, he also says to the parents, fathers specifically, you bring those children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Raise those children. They need teaching, which means you've got to spend time with them. They need training. You've got to spend time with them. They need discipline. You've got to spend time with them. There's no substitute for the time and the proper use of that time with parents and children. They've got friends. They've got friends. Moms and dads are not supposed to be the friends of their children. Maybe when you're grown. Maybe when the children are grown, have their own families, then they can really appreciate what their parents went through, and you can actually be friends. If your child in your home is your best friend, there's a problem. If you as their parent are their best friend in the world, there's a problem. They need to love you. They need to love you. They need to feel close to you. They need to be able to talk to you about anything, but it's because they see you in the proper position of authority and leadership and loving care over their lives. Not because you're best friends. It's not the way it's supposed to be. They've got friends. Those friends are supposed to be elsewhere. They need parents in the home. Parents who will give them what they need, even when it's not fun. Even when everything is not all smiles and giggles. Those are good times. One of the great things I have loved that Nikki has done with our children is teach them when you're in trouble, when I'm having to discipline you, when we're having to deal with each other in ways that are not pleasant, that's actually when we're displaying our love for you the most. Because it's not easy. It's not always fun. But children need parents. God gave us that pattern. They need parents. You want to know another attack the world has brought against the home, and it shows itself so much today, and I see our time's wrapping up, so I'll end this quickly. The single parent home. If you have been in a situation of being a single parent, you know just how difficult it is. If you've tried to do the right things and do the best for your children, it's hard. There are difficulties when you have two parents working together. But people have elevated the single parent home today to the point of basically saying we don't need two parents in the home anymore. One can do just as well. No. Any single parent who wants to do the right things would quickly and strongly tell you that one parent cannot do the same. One parent trying to fill two roles, trying to do everything. I can tell you quickly, I couldn't do that. Not the same way that I can with my wife. It's not the same. We need to understand the times. But more importantly, we need to understand the will of God no matter what time we live in. We need to follow God's word. And when we do, our families, our homes will be stronger, will be better, and most importantly, we will be what God wanted us to be and be able to go to heaven together. You want to talk about a successful home? It's a home where the husband, the wife, the children, where they all go to heaven together when this life is finished. Thank you so much for your time this evening.